Hello, Rob from Van Compass here, and today we're going to be working on our Ram Promaster, and we're going to be installing our lift kits, both front and rear, on this vehicle. So our lift kit for the front consists of these strut spacers, which have built-in camber and caster correction. They bolt on top of the strut, so there is no increase in stiffness of the vehicle. The van is going to handle exactly the same as it did before. It's going to have that same nice compliant feeling as it did from the factory. All we're doing is we're going to bump it up 1.5 inches in height. Now, doing this allows us to fit a bigger tire. We're going to get an increase in ground clearance, not only at the body of the van, underneath like the pinch seam, and the whole undercarriage is going to come up 1.5 inches, but we're also going to get additional ground clearance at the front of the vehicle, where the engine, the transmission, all those vital drivetrain components are at their lowest point. We're going to bump that up 1.5 inches as well by installing this lift kit. Installing our strut spacer lift kit up front is also going to allow us to eliminate the small tire that the Promaster comes with, and we're going to allow us to upgrade to a much larger tire, which is going to give us a smoother ride off-road due to the increased rolling diameter of the tire, as well as getting us a bunch more ground clearance underneath the van. This lift kit comes with all the hardware you need to install it. It's a very simple lift kit. It's just bolts right on top of the strut, like I said before. Since we're going to be in there, we're going to throw on a set of Bilstein B6s that we sell as well. Now, these struts we have found ride much better than the OEM struts. And since you got to pull the strut out of the vehicle anyway to install the lift kit, might as well do the struts on the van as well. That covers the front of the kit. That's going to eliminate the heavy nose down rake that Promasters have from the factory. We're going to show you what it looks like after we just do the front kit to get it a nice level stance. And then after that, we're going to put it back on the rack, and then we're going to install our rear lift kit as well. So this kit is great for heavy vans. Travato motorhomes are a great candidate for this rear kit that have a whole lot of weight in the back of the vehicle. Or just work vans like ours that hauls tons of payload all the time that need a little bump in the rear as well. The rear lift kit, again, 1.5 inches, comes with a lift block to raise the vehicle up. New U-bolts that are longer. You can see everything is plated or powder coated, so it's going to look good for a long time. All the hardware is included, and then additionally, part of this lift kit includes a longer rear shock. Now we're going to install a set of tuned Fox racing shocks. These are aluminum bodied shocks, and each shock that we send out the door for a Promaster, just like all vans we work on, all vans we sell components for, we tune the shock for the weight of the vehicle. So you tell us your weight, tell us what you're doing with the van, and we're going to go into the shocks and tune it for your application. That's about the extent of what we're going to do today. We're going to put this on the rack, and then we're going to take you guys step by step on how we're going to put this entire suspension package onto this Promaster van. Lift the vehicle or place it on jack stands to allow the front suspension to hang free. Then remove the front wheels and tires. In the interior, remove the floor panel near the driver's side to access the battery. Disconnect the ground cable on the battery. Refer to the instructions to locate the 4 screws securing the lower dash panel to the dash. Remove the lower dash panel to access the body control module. Unplug the necessary connectors on the body control module. Again, refer to the instructions for more details. With the electrical connectors removed, use a 10mm socket to remove the 3 nuts securing the body control module to the dash. Remove the body control module. Remove the top piece of sound deadening from on top of the strut tower. Take note of the top of the strut tower and locate the 3 upper strut mounting bolts. These will be removed at a later time. Remove the brake hose, ABS, and wheel speed sensor wiring from the strut. use a 5mm Allen wrench to remove the bolts securing the wheel speed sensor to the steering knuckle. Use a 14mm Allen wrench to remove the brake caliper adapter bolts. Once removed, pry the brake caliper free of the rotor and safely support the caliper on the inner fender of the vehicle. Make sure it doesn't hang by the brake hose. Use a 12mm socket to remove the wheel alignment pins which are securing the rotor to the hub. Remove the sway bar link from the lower control arm using a 19mm socket on the underside of the control arm. Use a 22mm socket to remove the nut securing the tie rod end to the steering knuckle. Once the nut is removed, use a small sledgehammer to knock free the taper from the steering knuckle. Use a small punch or flat blade screwdriver to open up the stakes which secure the axle nut to the axle shaft. Next, remove the axle nut using a 46mm socket. Remove the lower strut bolt. This will require the use of a 12-point 16mm socket or the correct inverted torque socket. Remove the lower ball joint nut using a 24mm socket. Again, use a small sledgehammer to knock the steering knuckle free from the control arm. With the lower ball joint taper unseated, have a helper aid by prying down on the lower control arm so the steering knuckle can be pulled free. Remove the lower steering knuckle, being careful not to remove the axle shaft from its inner mounting point. Remove the upper strut mounting bolts and remove the strut unit from the vehicle. At this time, if upgrading to new struts, this is the time to remove the spring and install on the new strut. Begin installing the strut spacer by installing the new included threaded studs into the top of the factory strut unit. Be sure to put red Loctite on all threaded studs. Install the strut spacer on top of the strut. These are driver and passenger side specific, so make sure that you have the right one going onto the correct strut. Install the included locking nuts and tighten to spec. The strut is now ready to be reinstalled into the vehicle. Have a helper aid by installing the strut mounting bolts inside of the vehicle. Loosen the rear lower control arm bolt to ease in the reassembly of the front suspension. Have a helper aid you in reassembling the steering knuckle back onto the strut while simultaneously fitting the axle shaft back through the hub. Reinstall the lower strut bolt. Reinstall the axle nut using the same 46mm socket. Torque the axle nut to spec. Have a helper aid in prying down the lower control arm so that the lower ball joint can be reinstalled into the lower control arm. Reinstall the lower ball joint. Reinstall the lower ball joint nut and torque to spec. Restake the axle nut so that the axle nut cannot come loose. Reinstall the rotor and fit the wheel alignment pins back in place. Use a dab of Loctite on the caliper adapter bolts. Refit the tie rod end to the steering knuckle. Refit wheel speed sensors, ABS wiring, and brake hose back onto the strut. Torque all components to spec. Use the instructions as a guide. Reinstall the body control module and all necessary electrical connectors. Reinstall all dash components on both sides of the vehicle. Ground cable on the battery can be hooked back up, as well as the floor panel reinstalled. Front lift kit installation is now complete. Begin by safely supporting the vehicle so the rear suspension can hang free. Cut the small zip tie securing the ABS wiring and wheel speed sensor wiring together. Remove the ABS sensor and wheel speed sensor wiring from their respective mounting clips near the brake hose. Pry open the clips securing the emergency brake cable to the rear axle. Use a 19mm 12-point socket to remove the lower shock bolt. Use the same socket to remove the upper shock bolt and remove the shock from the vehicle. Support the rear axle and use a 22mm socket to remove the U-bolt nuts. Lower the rear axle away from the leaf spring. Install the rear lift block and raise the axle back into place. Install the new longer U-bolts included with the kit. Install the new washers and nylock nuts included with the kit. Use a 22mm socket to tighten the U-bolt nuts. Torque the U-bolt nuts to the specifications in the instructions. Install the new longer Fox Racing shocks onto the vehicle. Use the OEM bolts previously removed and be sure to fit the spacer washer between the mounting point and the shock body. Reinstall the wheels and tires and lower the van to the ground. Installation of the rear kit is now complete. If you're looking for more upgrades for your Ram Promaster, check out our website at vancompass.com.